The rain pours down on the streets of Manhattan one dark, stormy night. For Ben Reilly, the biological clone of Peter Parker, another average work shift ends without excitement. As he closes up the coffee shop for the day, his mind already races to the long night of web slinging ahead of him. But Ben couldn't even imagine the horrors coming his way. As he turns his back to his boss, Shirley, he feels a sudden flash of pain as something cold and metal whacks against the back of his head. Holding his aching head, Ben whips around to see Shirley looking down at him with uncharacteristic hate in her eyes. "You're not Shirley," Ben accuses from the floor, still trying to calm the pulsing white-hot pain in his head. The figure that stood above him began to morph and violently change form.
"I'm whoever I want to be,"
the terrifying shapeshifter told him as it shifted its visage between many different faces. As its face changed between Craven the Hunter, Uncle Ben, Aunt May, and even Gwen Stacy, Ben's ambusher's speech grew more and more frantic and unhinged.
"I know all about you, Benjamin,"
it said.
"You and Peter, even that defective Kane."
As the creature took on the form of Captain Stacy, it continued to growl down at Ben.
"I know you all better than I know myself, the innocents who have died,
All because of you.
And with that reaching the apex of its emotional turbulence, the shape-shifting creature fully lost control over its own form. A writhing, withering mass of faces and body parts erupted from where moments ago Ben's boss Shirley had stood. A gargantuan gray behemoth suddenly stood in front of Ben, bearing down on him with all of its weight and screaming in 10 different voices. Seeing now the true monster he was up against, Ben jumped into action. Barreling through the oozing heaps of sludge, Ben found his every move slowed and ineffective. Ben realized that the creature was radiating some kind of toxin that seeps through my skin, permeates my mind. But even in the face of overwhelming odds, Ben Reilly knew that Spider-Man never gives up. Throwing off the tendrils of the monster, Ben roared back at it. "Whoever you are, whatever you are, tell your master it won't work." But then the sludge said something that sent chills up Ben's spine.
Really, brother? You've always underestimated me, ignored me, treated me like a joke.
As it spoke, the shapeshifter's form became more cohesive, more controlled. Eventually, as Ben Reilly watched on in horror, the creature revealed its true nature.
The clone, the sibling, none of you ever acknowledge. My father gave me a true name, so you can just call me Spider-Side.
Standing before Ben as he struggled to comprehend the words he was hearing was the giant, menacing form of his abandoned clone sibling seeking revenge. Grasping Ben in its enlarged, grotesque fist, Spider-Side was closer than ever to ending one of his brothers for good. After all, every clone of Peter Parker's share one parent, the mad scientist known as the Jackal. And as Ben Reilly found himself flung through the glass window out into the pouring rain, he could only hope his brother would answer his questions. "Why are you doing this?" Ben asked desperately. "What does the Jackal want from me?" But Ben's questions only enraged Spider-Side further.
I serve no one but myself,
the creature bellowed as it followed Ben into the downpour. Not letting up on Ben for a second, Spider-Side crashed one heavy fist down into Ben's chest.
Stop underestimating me, brother,
Spider-Side taunted.
Your life depends on it.
Ben understood the truth in his brother's words and quickly flipped the giant monstrosity off of his chest and sprung to his feet. But Ben's quick footwork sent Spider-Side crashing into the middle of a busy Manhattan street. A freight truck barreling down the slippery concrete collided with Spider-Side at full speed. The force of the impact splattered Spider-Side's physical form all across the block, and for a moment it looked like the threat was contained. But slowly, the remnants of Spider-Side's gooey, sludge-based body coalesced back into his terrible form, which stood over the truck driver menacingly. Out of nowhere, just moments before Spider-Side mercilessly claimed its first victim, Ben shot out from the sidewalk and tackled his shape-shifting brother. "Run!" he yelled as he leaped to the man's defense, trying desperately to keep Spider-Side's attention on him. Swinging away to get some breathing room, Ben Reilly began to feel a pang of empathy for this creature. After all, for 5 years, I believed I was a clone, an inhuman thing with no right to live. But as he considers his past, Ben forgets that he and Spiderside's kinship prevents Ben's spider sense from warning him of incoming attacks. As Ben looks behind him, he's too late to prevent the gigantic frame of Spiderside from barreling into him and forcing him once more to the cold concrete below. Desperate, Ben Reilly starts to fear that Spiderside is here to dispatch him and steal his life. "Have you come to take my place? Usurp my life?" he yells at the towering monstrosity. "Well, guess what? You can't have it!" But even as Ben's fists pummel into Spiderside, one swipe from the monster sends Ben hurtling through a nearby wall. "I don't want your life!" Spiderside yells as the rage inside boils over. Walking up slowly to Ben's mangled form, the ooze of Spiderside's body slowly begins surrounding Ben and wrapping him in a disgusting, horrific cocoon. In his last moments before being engulfed in Spiderside's sludge, Ben manages, "Then what do you want from me?" Spiderside, having incapacitated his victim, only smiles as he walks off into the darkness, Ben Reilly's defeated body in tow.
"I'll be happy to tell you,"
the monster says,
"after I've taken you home."
When he awoke, Ben was staring at the last person he expected to see, Mary Jane. Of course, the oozing tendrils wrapped around him let Ben know that this image of MJ was a hoax. As Ben sat bound to his seat, he listened as Spiderside explained his insane logic behind kidnapping Ben in the first place. As Spiderside spoke, he changed his form into more and more figures from Peter's past. Mary Jane, Gwen Stacy, and Betty Brant, just to name a few.
Everything Peter took from you,
Spiderside ranted wildly.
"I can restore."
With horrifying open arms, Spiderside split himself into multiple bodies, all looking to Ben with dead-eyed stares as he asked Ben to stay with him forever. But Ben, of course, was unimpressed with Spiderside's unhinged request. "You want to understand humanity, Spiderside?" he retorted back at his long-lost brother. "Then the first thing you have to do is take responsibility for the terrible things you've done." This infuriated Spiderside, whose multiple bodies all grimaced in anger and hatred.
No!
Spiderside screamed through many mouths.
We cannot allow you to lock us away!
"In some laboratory again."
All at once, Spiderside's many personas rushed at Ben almost zombie-like, but Ben saw a weakness to exploit in Spiderside's approach. "The more he multiplies himself, the weaker my bonds become." Just at that moment, as Spiderside's doppelgangers tore their way towards Ben's helpless figure, Ben broke free of the tendrils holding him and launched himself towards the main figure of Spiderside himself. As Ben took the giant costume monster to the ground and began laying into him again and again, the eerie figures from Peter's past dove onto him and tried to hold him back from Spiderside Prime.
We offer you Peter Parker's life.
The drones spew angrily at Ben.
The manifestation of all your dreams, and this is how you repay us?
"You don't understand."
Ben clenched his teeth as the many fists bore down on him. "I don't want Peter's life!" Ben roared, throwing the Spiderside-created bodies off of him all at once, giving himself some much-needed breathing room. Now, having realized his plan was always destined to fail, Spiderside threw off his facade and all of his bodies returned to the monstrous visage of his natural form. These dozens of Spiderside clones bore down on poor Ben Reilly, who valiantly fought them off as best he could. As Ben battled against Spiderside's many forms, suddenly the sludge-like forms of Spiderside began to soften and unmake themselves. Something's wrong, Ben realized as his blows began to find more purchase. His duplicates, they're losing control, breaking apart and scattering like wet clay. Seeing his opening, Ben could tell that Spiderside was just barely holding himself together. As Spiderside Prime's body began to melt and wither, he could only manage a whisper as Ben knelt in close.
"I'm no man's brother. I'm something vile, a deformity, a disease. I should never have been born."
Before Ben could comfort the lost clone, however, Spiderside's body began glowing red hot. Realizing what was to come, Ben just barely escaped the blast of his brother's self-explosion in time. Spiderside's molecular structure became unstable somehow and he just erupted. Though Ben looked through the rubble tirelessly, he couldn't find a single trace of his clone brother. But understandably, after seeing Spiderside explode, Ben thought the threat had been neutralized. That is, until a few hours later. At Ravencroft Asylum, home to the office and renowned scientist Dr. Kafka, Spider-Man is assuring his friends that the threat of Spiderside has been dealt with. Suddenly, one Dr. Leo rushes into the room with a strange smirk on his face. "Dr. Kafka!" Leo yells in horror. "Take a look at the monitors." Glancing toward the screen, both Kafka and Spider-Man realize that something is extremely wrong. "The inmates!" Kafka cries. "They're all loose! How did this happen?" Dr. Kafka wonders in panic. Dr. Leo answers coldly, "Because I hacked the security system." At this point, Ben has realized they've all been played. Grabbing Dr. Leo by the shoulders and throwing him against the wall, Ben recognized the all-too-familiar clay-like sensation of a shapeshifter skin. "This isn't Dr. Leo!" Spider-Man warned the room. As Ben outed the imposter, Spider-Side's form began to shift and melt once more, revealing his true form to all those within the facility. "But I saw you die!" Ben screams in confusion as Spider-Side reveals themselves.
You saw aspects of me die,
Spider-Side retorted with disdain.
but this aspect survived. It was a shame to lose the others, but in the end, I'm more than enough.
As he speaks, Spider-Side grows twice his size without issue, towering over Spider-Man and the scientists. "At least let my friends go," Ben begs Spider-Side. "Please." Roughly, the insane clone throws the scientist from the control room.
I'll release them, for now.
Spider-Side agrees.
After all, the three of you have more important matters to attend to.
Smiling, Spider-Side looked once more to the security monitors, all of which now show the many superpowered inmates being released and storming through the prison towards freedom. The Ravenscroft Institute has been overrun with superpowered inmates. After the prisoners were armed and released by the evil clone Spider-Side, the security forces within the prison struggled to contain the mass breakout of some of the world's most powerful and dangerous individuals. In the office of the brilliant psychiatrist Dr. Kafka, Spider-Man stares down Spider-Side with anger and confusion behind his mask. Spider-Side's form finishes molding into the beefy, gigantic monster that he is and almost smirks as he taunts Ben.
Now, before you come charging at me,
Spider-Side tells Spider-Man,
I suggest you turn your attention to the inmates I armed and released before they murder every guard in the place, and then carry that slaughter out beyond these gates.
Ben stares at Spider-Side in silence. By leaving to take care of the inmates, Ben would be leaving both Dr. Kafka and her assistant Edward in the mercy of Spider-Side, something he is not willing to do. But as he decides, the brave voice of Dr. Kafka behind him spurs Ben into action. I know you're worried about us, Ben, but we're not important. Go! With that, Spider-Man heads off into the fray of battle, turning at the last second to make eye contact with Spider-Side. I swear to God, if you hurt them, Ben threatens and then disappears from view. Wasting no time, Spider-Side turns to Edward, Dr. Kafka's assistant, and begins forcing his tendrils up through Edward's nose and far into his brain. Spider-Side knows that this particular assistant was once a supervillain named Vermin, and by re-triggering Edward's alter ego, Spider-Side hopes to throw one more wrench into Ben's hopes of making it out of Ravencroft alive. As Ben races through the Institute, he hears the sounds of suffering and fear all around him. Roars of pain, deranged laughter echoing through the halls. Soon, Ben's thoughts turn to those of self-blame. If I had only known that Dr. Leo was dead, that one of Spider-Side's other selves had taken his place at Ravencroft, maybe I could have prevented this. Spider-Man swings through the halls with remarkable agility as he swiftly takes down each supervillain with tactical force. Typhoid Mary, just moments away from mind-controlling a guard into shooting himself in the head, becomes Ben's first victim as a barrage of webbing puts an end to her terrible spree. Back in Dr. Kafka's office, Spider-Side finds himself with one of Ben Reilly's greatest allies at his mercy. But even as Spider-Side tries to bask in his victory, Dr. Kafka begins breaking down his fragile psyche. You say you're wearing that costume to mock him, but I suspect the real reason is that you want to be him. Because you know that somewhere deep down in your core, you are him. But this cogent analysis from the doc only enrages Spider-Side further. He grabs Kafka by the neck and lifts her up into the air, screaming,
You don't know me! I'm nothing like him! Riley's everything I'm not, everything I hate!
But even as Spider-Side regressed into a tantrum, the injured Dr. Kafka knew she was getting somewhere. As Ben web-slings his way through the halls of the Institute, the villains he faces become more and more formidable. Ben easily sees through the disguises of the chameleon, who tries to frighten Spider-Man by approaching him as the deceased Kraven the Hunter. But next, Spidey runs into Mr. Hyde, a super powerful behemoth. Though Mr. Hyde seems ready to snuff the life from Ben, something catches his eye and a deep, profound fear radiates across the monstrosity's face. As a familiar green gas fills the room, the vision of a giant spider solidifies itself in Mr. Hyde's mind. As Ben struggles to figure out who has come to his aid, a smoky voice descends from the rafters.
A convincing illusion to rattle the giant, some halothane vapors to put him to sleep and prove once again what a master showman I am.
Mysterio? Ben says, incredulous at one of Spider-Man's greatest foes saving his behind in this moment of chaos. But just as Mysterio saves Ben from one enemy, another comes racing out from the shadows. Vermin, freshly reawoken by Spider-Side, leaps onto Mysterio as he floats above the chaos and drags him to the ground. Smashing Mysterio's fishbowl helmet, it's only some quick web work from Ben Reilly that stops Vermin from eating Mysterio alive that very moment. As Spider-Man desperately tries to reason with Vermin, he sees only hate and hunger in his opponent's eyes. But as Spidey tries to get through to his friend, Vermin sees the villain Swarm preparing to take Ben from behind. All of a sudden, Vermin's eyes grow softer and Edward's mind returns to himself. "Ben, get down!" he cries as he tackles Spider-Man out of the way of Swarm's attack. After saving Ben, Edward dives into Swarm's cape and rips out the human skeleton that animates the evil colony of insects. But as Vermin saves Spider-Man's life and takes down the terrifying Swarm, the villain Shriek is able to bowl Ed over with a cheap shot, sending the man careening into a wall and knocking him unconscious. Ben fights valiantly against both Shriek and the Scorpion, while Spider-Side descends the stairs from Kafka's office and joins the heat of the battle he started. Clapping sarcastically at Ben's impressive but doomed efforts, Spider-Side explains the trick that has been up his sleeve the whole time.
You see, when I released these fine specimens, I gifted each one with a tiny fragment of my own DNA.
As Spider-Side told Ben of his evil plot, the inmates began amassing around the two spiders, their eyes red with anger as they stared at Spider-Man hatefully.
No matter how many times you knock them down,
Spider-Side continued,
they'll keep getting back up again. It won't last forever, just long enough for them to kill you.
With that, the entire inmate population of Ravencroft Institute rushed at Spider-Man, ready to tear him limb from limb. Ben fought his hardest but was eventually overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of the prisoners. Rather than revel at the supposed victory, Spider-Side grimaced as he watched his clone brother be pummeled into the ground within an inch of his life. Eventually, the clone couldn't take it anymore.
No!
He bellowed as his duplicate bodies raced out to take control of the facility and stop the inmates from killing Spider-Man.
Damn you, Kafka!
Spider-Side said as he fought off the inmates that he himself had freed only minutes earlier.
You were right. Like it or not, Riley is a part of me. The only spark of decency, of humanity in my warped, corrupted heart, and I can't let him die.
Standing over Ben's broken and bloody body, Spider-Side fell to his knees. Removing his mask for the first time as he approached his fallen brother, Spider-Side's true face is revealed to look exactly like Ben Reilly's. Creating the duplicates it took to quell the prison break took considerable energy from Spider-Side, but as he knelt beside Ben Reilly's dying body, Spider-Side lent all of his life force energy to his brother. Ben could feel the energy entering his form through Spider-Side's tendrils, and before long, his eyes shot open in surprise. Even more surprising was seeing the man who tried to kill him staring back at Ben with relief and love in his eyes. "Sorry?" Ben asked upon waking. "You saved me, you..." But Spider-Side cut his brother off. Maybe I'm not such a monster after all." Ben took Spider-Side's face and touched his forehead to his clones. "You're as human as I am, brother." But before Ben could finish, Spider-Side began coughing profusely. Doubling back in pain, Spider-Side's eyes stayed locked with Ben's as his body convulsed and locked up. Eventually, Spider-Side's eyes rolled back in his head as the clone finally passed away, having offered up the last of his life force so that his brother could live. Still, somehow, they're both doing better than Peter Parker. The original Spider-Man has lost his mind.